You're listening to LevelUp's Emerging Market Series with Melissa Zalou from IronSource and Tom Wijman, Senior Market Analyst at Newzoo.
Welcome back, everyone. I'm Melissa Zalou, and you're listening to Level Up, the podcast for people who love making, growing, and of course, playing mobile games. This is the latest episode in our exciting series on emerging or growth gaming markets, which I'm co-hosting with Tom Wijman, who's a Senior Market Analyst at Newzoo. After a great discussion in our last episode about the Indian gaming market, today we'll be focusing on Turkey. And our guest today is Emre Taş, who's CEO of Turkish hyper-casual game studio Alictus. Emre, Tom, thanks so much for being on the show today.
Melissa, thank you for having me.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Emre, you're the CEO of one of Turkey's leading mobile game studios, and I mean, perhaps it's also worth kind of saying that when we're looking, I mean, ostensibly this series is about emerging game markets, but in many ways, Turkey is a relatively mature emerged or emerging market. What's been your personal journey in the gaming industry? How did you end up as the sort of CEO and founder of Alictus?
Okay, yeah, sure. So, Melissa, this may be a little bit a long answer, as I will tell you a bit more about Alictus. So, Alictus is a self-funded independent gaming studio in Turkey, and my co-founder and Ingame, we founded the company about almost 7 years ago. So today we are 20 people in the company and still growing in numbers. We love making games, turning bold ideas into beautiful products and technologies. And above all, we love working with people who are crazy enough to do so. So I will dive into our journey a little bit deep, as I think founders in the early times especially can find it interesting. So Alictus, it was founded in 2013. We bootstrapped the company early few years and then started to make our own games and self-publish them. This is how actually we have a brand name called Clown Games, and it was born by the end of 2016. And Clown Games became our publisher brand, as we wanted to separate the company and the publisher identities back then. And 2017 and 18, we worked a lot on that IO games on mobile and ended up creating just around 20 games by that time. So those games eventually acquired more than 40 million players without any paid user acquisition or editorial featuring. So simply put, we worked hard at that time to apply growth hacking techniques with heavy ASO and brand building. And even today we have a YouTube channel with more than 1 million subscribers, which we had brought up in those days. So, and starting in 2019, we thought it was the right time for Alictus to jump on the hyper-casual train. We invested a lot in growth technologies, built fantastic systems for business and market intelligence, and also automation. So we diversified our team structure, had new members to strengthen our data-driven perspective, while keeping and actually even empowering creative freedom right in the middle of the Alictus culture. So last year in 2019, we released 4 titles, all of which have become sustainably profitable. Boaz.io, Spear.io, Artball 3D, and Collectubes. And this has always been our goal with our titles, to have sustained, long-lasting, profitable products. And among all 4, Collectubes is the one that has brought the most joy to Alictus, being number 1 overall app for a period of time and staying in top 10 games for many months. And we were only 10 people while doing all that last year. And this year we already released 2 new titles. One is called Brick Merge. It sits between a hyper-casual and casual puzzle. And just 3 days ago we released another title, Jewel Shop 3D, right now climbing charts in the United States as we speak. So for us, 2020, we have a solid looking pipeline, and I hope we will see more of those games this year.
Thank you very much. It's a very interesting story, Emre, and one I think we'll probably want to dive into various elements of later on. But Tom, maybe just to kind of give us the Newzoo perspective and kind of a wider look at the history of the Turkish gaming market. Was the market sort of mobile first, or were traditional video games also big there? What's growth been like over the last few years? What's the evolution of this market?
Yeah, sure. I can talk about that. You mentioned it at the beginning already, but Turkey is kind of an odd one out in the markets we're covering in this series because it's can hardly be classified as an emerging market. It's really it's still growing fast. It's a growth market, but it was already quite sizable before the whole mobile gaming revolution happened, and that is still true. But at the same time, mobile gaming is growing really fast as well. And the combination of these two factors actually make it that Turkey breaks into our top 20 markets by game revenues, and has been for the past few years. So definitely, it started with PC gaming, console gaming. Actually, very much like some of the closer countries from the European side, at least. Um, right now, there's about a little over 30 million gamers in Turkey, so that's quite a lot, and that is still going to grow almost a little over 8% every year, at least for the following 3 years, with many of that growth, of course, coming to the mobile segment. The same is actually true in terms of revenues. Most of that growth is coming on mobile, but PC and console gaming is very healthy as well.
Amazing, and so we've talked a lot about growth, which is and clearly Turkey's mobile game industry has grown quite significantly in recent years. Um, Also in terms of acquisition, so we've had Zynga buying Gram Games in 2018, and also Peak Games selling part of their company for 100 million the year before. What are kind of some of the factors that are driving this growth? And kind of what sets Turkey apart. We've talked about the fact that it's relatively mature. Why is it that it's managed to mature so fast, do you think?
Yeah, so perhaps actually the reason these are tied together, and I'm sure Emre can attest or maybe talk about this later a little bit as well. But the fact that there already is a local development scene that is to the point where you see these big money acquisitions going on, these 250 million, 100 million acquisitions of Turkish game developers. Um, and I think, but again, looking to the perspective of Emma as well, that part of the reason that this is happening is because Turkey was already quite a big country in terms of gaming and in terms of people that are playing games, which led to people wanting to work in games, develop their own games, which made it so that uh, they were making these games that were popular across the world so they could be acquired by large mobile publishers such as Zynga. So I think these two are sort of connected. But Emre, perhaps you can comment on that as well.
Yeah, Tom, I agree with you on that, and maybe we can add on top of that the success of the technical universities in Turkey. So there are lots of very good technical universities in Turkey, which eventually helped Turkish game development scene to have like very solid, strong game developers. And then the talent wasn't an issue for Turkish game development companies to rise in the last decade. And today, what we currently saying is that in one particular sense, is that some of those talents are now starting their own gigs. And on the other hand, this is like enabling a lot more new developers to like take a dive into this this industry, because now I guess people are more inclined to say that okay, gaming industry is an option for a career now, and then this removes the very big barrier that had been around for the country uh, for the last 10 years maybe.
And Emre, you talked about Alictus making a decision to start investing in hyper casual games. What genres of mobile games, and really this is a question for both of you, but I guess maybe Tom, you can take it first. What genres of mobile games are particularly popular in Turkey, and which ones actually do you think have the most potential for growth?
I think what's happening in Turkey is very much a reflection of what's happening in the broader world around it. Last year and the year before, shooter games on mobile really if you forgive me, exploded a little bit in the sense that PUBG Mobile grew very fast 2018 and throughout 2019, and now Call of Duty as well, the mobile edition. At the same time as we see mobile gaming moving more towards these core experiences, hyper casual is growing really fast as well. And we're sort of seeing these two diverging paths, but both can be very successful.
Maybe I can add the perspective from a player side and then a developer side. From player perspective, casual puzzle and board games are particularly strong genres in Turkey. Mostly, I can say due to the cultural reasons, and this is especially for board games because I mean we used to play those board games offline, and then it became online, and then we see the Zynga acquiring like board games of the peak. And nevertheless, the games in both genres are already very matured. And in my opinion, the market is already at its peak in terms of size for this genre. On the other hand, like PUBG or any other mid-core mobile games, or maybe games with social layers, have a really large user base in Turkey. In the last few years, we also started to see international companies to allocate more resources for their Turkey operations, given that there is an uptrend in spendings of players in free-to-play games. On the other hand, from the developer's perspective, I wouldn't really watch for like fully ad-based games to operate in Turkey, given that we are a hyper-casual publisher, and then Turkey shouldn't be in the top of our list at this moment.
Mm-hmm. And aside from Alictus, Emre, who are the sort of big players of the mobile gaming scene right now in Turkey?
Well, so especially hyper-casual gaming in mobile is booming in Turkey. We see lots of new developers and publishers are showing up almost every month. And after the success of Turkish hyper-casual publishers like Good Job Games, we have seen a boom in hyper-casual publisher companies in Turkey last year. Unfortunately, we also seen most of them have disappeared, even before they appeared, so to say. And on the other hand, a few of those have got a better foothold in the market, such as Relic Games being one of them. On the game development front, small size studios are being formed every other day, and they are trying novel ideas with local and global hyper-casual publishers. I see this trend very positive, and hopefully it will be a driving force for Turkish game development industry in this decade. Returning to your question about like the who is already there, I can mention Ruby Games and bigger games, and also maybe Pantheon with their recent success with home restoration game. And also, it may be also worth mentioning Koda and Unico, as their founders are also Turkish. So, apart from those, there are like dozens of independent developers or smaller studios working with publishers all around the world. And it wouldn't be odd to see new and fresh successes anytime soon. But then it's not only happening in hyper casual. Like there are highly promising startups formed or to be formed in other genres too. Dream Games has set a good example for the market and for the investors' appetite for new journeys to be led by trained and qualified people who had their experiences in ecosystems strong companies. So what's more is that although we cannot yet quite easily set examples for local talents to stay than going abroad, we already started to see more and more people are staying in Turkey or even coming back after years of working abroad, thanks to improved quantity and quality of studios in Turkey with recent successes. So this is why maybe Tom is right about like Turkey is becoming more emerged gaming industry than emerging one. And I'm really very positive that this momentum will grow to this direction in the next few years.
Emre, thank you for speaking on this. I was wondering if you can elaborate a bit on what the state of competition at the moment is. You mentioned that there's a mix of smaller, newer studios and big companies entering the market. Would you say that those big companies dominate the market, or is it still accessible for new and small developers?
Well, I think domination of big companies in casual space is very apparent right now because the playbook of in-app purchase-driven casual is well written and established. But that being said, solid game design stepping into relatively less saturated audiences can still enable building success stories, I guess. So although the market is fairly dominated, there may be still room for new studios. But then the billion-dollar question here should be that if there are any such audiences left that we can tap into, and what those are. I think this hyper-casual space can answer that, or it is already answering by testing like lots of new, fresh, novel ideas as rapidly as possible. So hyper-casuals evolving into casual might unlock new potentials in that sense. On the other hand, for the hyper-casual, to answer to this question might be a bit more tricky because the playbook is right now well written, but not very established yet, and it is still evolving. So the state of the competition is hyper-casual. What's like? Is it accessible for newcomers? I must say it is neither totally blocked or open for all. In my opinion, especially now, it is time to act for hyper-casual developers, time to adapt because the playbook is changing, the market is changing, market is evolving. Today, for any developer around the world, including Turkey, it is fairly easy to connect with a publisher. For any publisher, given that there's a qualified game in their hands and given that they know what they're doing and most importantly, they are capable of doing that, the market is still accessible for new publishers too. And then it is completely a statistics game. It's almost purely performance. But then there's a big competition in almost every step. For developers, it is to engage the attention of a publisher, to test their ideas, to have timely feedback from publishers, to iterate and release a profitable title. All of those are like somewhat big frictions for small size, mid-sized companies. And given that there are tens of thousands of games being produced to be submitted to publishers every month, if not more, and given the number of meaningfully profitable games getting launched in a year, odds are not very high to be successful. But then we see lots of success over and over again against all the odds. So what I think is that for game developers in Turkey, perseverance and deep understanding of the dynamics around the game to cut down the need for feedback from publishers is the key for game developers. If I keep going and tell you a bit more about the state of the competition for publishers, I can say that state of competition for publishers is changing even more interestingly. For new publishers and actually even for the current ones, the market is getting even fiercer as we see the market is evolving into a new type of publishing norm. As networks and platforms are getting into the party, things are getting much more challenging for everyone in that area. Sourcing right developers and games were previously depicted as a competitive advantage for publishers. And today, all of a sudden, networks and platforms and publishers of networks and platforms eliminated this perception, instantly. So I wouldn't be betting on starting a new publishing business unless I have a strong competitive advantage against publishers of networks and platforms. For current publishers without network and publisher ties, networks and platform ties, doors might be closing, and I think they have to gravitate towards a better alternative. And for us, for a fairly small number of companies like Alictus, who do both development and self-publishing, I think it's time to focus more on games and more on partnerships and multiplying our efforts with strong technologies. Unlike others treating games as black boxes or growth as black boxes, companies like us have the capacity of understanding every aspect of our game and its data and how to comment it. So yes, Melissa, our friends at Iron Source are, as you are telling, growth is a loop, and being able to comment every part of that loop, including the game, UA, and monetization operations, I believe a company can create a very solid edge in the market. Having the right synergy and organizational structures, enabling gaming and growth teams speak and work together, should be the key there. So again, very long answer for your question, Tom. To sum everything up, the market is evolving, I guess, once again, and creating new opportunities for anyone at any size. So there are opportunities, although there's a very big domination of big companies in current areas, but there are new opportunities emerging every other day. Companies who are really ready, I think they will reap the fruits.
Thank you for that very in-depth answer, Emre. I feel like we probably could have had a whole episode maybe just on competition in the Turkish market, but it's a story for another time. You talked a little bit about the differences between kind of IAP games and hyper-casual or more ad-based games. I'll ask you, Emre, and then Tom. I think you should also would be interesting to hear Newzoo's perspective. But what's the sort of proportional split in the Turkish game market of kind of IAP versus more ad-based games? And have we seen in-game spending evolve over the last few years? Are Turkish gamers spending more? Is advertising revenue or ad revenue as a revenue stream for game developers increasing in importance? I realize I've just asked you 7 questions. Feel free to take whichever one you want.
I'll leave it to Emre to answer first. I think I'm curious to hear his perspective.
For Turkish market, I think I might a bit struggle to answer because I mean IAP is not like something we do, and then Turkish market alone, that we don't really operate a lot in Turkey. So given those two facts, I would say what I would assume is that IAP should have a big portion in Turkey, whereas ad revenues cannot cover the bills.
I can attest to what you were saying, indeed, that in-game spending is relatively far larger than advertising revenues are. Even though that Turkey has quite a large population, quite a lot of them are gamers, that is not enough to just focus on the Turkey market if you are trying to monetize through advertising. In-game spending, however, is quite high compared to other emerging markets. The average spend for a mobile player is well above what, for example, the current situation is in India or Southeast Asia that we talked about in previous episodes. So it's very profitable. Well, very profitable. It's very manageable to monetize through in-game spending in Turkey and through Turkish mobile gamers. And to answer the question, where will that grow in the coming years? Well, that's thankfully for all of us working in this industry, the only way there is up. That's going to continue to grow. So, Emre, I already mentioned Turkey has a large population, large online population, and over 30 million of those identify or classify as gamers, both mobile gamers, but also PC gamers, console gamers. And as we have seen from what's been happening in the recent years, that's a very attractive market for foreign developers as well. Tencent is active. They're the first time they launched any game under their own name outside of China was Arena of Valor in Turkey. Epic Games, Riot Games have a larger presence in Turkey than anywhere else in the region. Can you talk to us about how Turkey is such an attractive starting point for these foreign companies looking to enter this market and perhaps understand more of the region around it as well?
I think definitely the young gamer population is the answer here. I mean, to the contrary of some other countries, the playtime of people does not decline as people get older in Turkey. I mean, once people in their 20s, if they're engaged with a game, it is fairly common to say that they're an active player, if not viewer of the game in their 30s as well. And on top of that, the socio-economic and the cultural status of Turkey result in people having quite a long screen time, and then they spend this time playing their favorite games over years. So in Turkey, a strong game can turn into an evergreen intellectual property, and it can stay that way for many years, I think. And on the other hand, that's like people love playing games in Turkey. The population is young, and then population prefers playing competitive games again prior to again because of the historical reasons in Turkey. There were like lots of gaming cafes, internet cafes that people come together and then spend their social times, I would say. And then as the technology became more accessible for those people in their life now, I think they became very active players in the market, and then the spending is already there. The only challenge and issue might be for an international company to get into Turkish markets is localization, maybe. I mean, because what I observe in the market is that if a game is not localized, and I'm not just telling you about the translation of text or images, etc. Really hardcore localized content, it can struggle in Turkish market. And I actually have an anecdote of that. I was working for a couple of translation agencies before I found Alictus, and it was like before 2010. And I can say that I helped some companies and some people to harvest their crops back in like the heyday of the Facebook games in around 2010. So what we observed back then is that after the game was localized in Turkish market, then the growth of the game was, and all of those games were enormous.
That's well, you've anticipated one of our next questions, but maybe I'll sort of take it to a different angle. If localization is important, how important is having a local office? I think earlier on, one of you mentioned that well, first of all, Tom, you said that many games have larger presence in Turkey compared to kind of other countries in the region, and I think one of you mentioned that more and more companies are setting up or investing in their local Turkish operations. Is having a local office and a local team critical to success inside the Turkish market?
I guess it is, especially for PC and console games, and maybe some mid-core mobile games, because then the customer success, the player engagements through the customer success will be very essential. So probably it will not be like a requirement for those companies to have a development studio in Turkey, but then have a local persona might do the trick to touch the player base.
Mm-hmm. And what about sort of flipping the perspective? Not talking about succeeding inside the Turkish market, but rather for a Turkish developer or studio looking to succeed outside of Turkey. How does Alictus approach global launches? And do you localize your games for outside the Turkish market?
Mm-hmm. So what we do, I mean, we develop our games for the international audiences, and mostly for the English-speaking market, and recently China and APAC. So what we do, I mean, we don't really localize our games because we are making hyper casual, we are making like instant, very approachable content, and most of the time they are not like they don't have any text or content that can be localized. Like it's purely for mass audience, for anyone in the global arena. So we don't apply lots of localizations. That being said, for APAC, we do localize like the title of the game and then the store description, store visuals, etc. But most of the time it doesn't apply to game itself because game is fairly easy to understand for anyone in the world.
Mm-hmm. And what advice, let's say it's one of those new small studios cropping up in the Turkish gaming scene, coming to you and asking for your advice on how to kind of crack a good global launch, what kind of advice would you give them?
I can answer for the ad-based games. So working with the right partners, right technology and infrastructure is the key. And then it's all about like testing hypotheses and applying them as frequently as possible. And if you're really well equipped and you can do that fairly easily to some extent, as there are accessible solutions to help you make better monetization decisions and growth decisions. And I guess maybe the most important thing is to be informed at all times, whether it is by like talking with your partners, reading a blog, or even listening to this podcast. And and I can say that for a special note for Turkish developers, okay, we were emerging, we are emerged, and then the Turkish game development scene is going to be growing, and this should be the time for Turkish game developers, and I think we should make good use of this time.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you very much for that answer and for that completely unofficial plug of the podcast. I did not tell him to say that. And really thank you both for being on the show today. It's been super interesting to talk about Turkey. And after we stop recording, Emre, I'm going to talk to you about all the places that I've been and how much I love the country. But that's not relevant for our audience. For you guys, thank you for listening, as always. And tune in next episode to hear about more emerging game markets.